crisis advocate at the Friendship Center, and this will be week 3 of our support group, and the topic is stalking. I'm here with my co-facilitator, Gina. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. So I'm Gina Baysdorfer, and I am the Client Care Director and Operations Manager at the Friendship Center. And like Chelsea said, I co-host our support group.
Awesome. And so today we're going to be sharing a couple different resources for stalking, stalking prevention and awareness. And then we're going to be talking about how it's affected by COVID, how it could be affected by, some of the restrictions we've been under during this pandemic, and also just how society sees and represents stalking. So yeah, we can just dive right in with just a basic definition of stalking. It's a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. So I know that's a very broad definition of it, but these patterns consist of, they include various tactics as unwanted phone calls, texts, unwanted contact via social media, unwanted gifts, showing up at your work unannounced, or your home, or at your friend's home, or your family's home, approaching individuals, and monitoring your whereabouts physically or through social media or through any kind of surveillance technology. And then also, it can escalate into damaging property, threats of violence, or it can end in violence.
I think too, one of the important things that sometimes gets lost when we talk about stalking is that all of these behaviors can happen in a way that doesn't seem particularly threatening or scary to somebody who is not the victim themselves. And so, for instance, if somebody is leaving gifts on your car or notes at your office or things like that, and they seem very romantic or loving in nature. So if you have like a friend with you, for instance, and they see that the note says, "I love you, I miss you so much, I want to try again," something like that, that friend or family member might not immediately get why you might be completely freaked out or terrified. And because you have some additional context to that relationship that your friend or family member probably doesn't. But ultimately, what that is showing, it's sending the message, not "I love you and I miss you and I want you back," but "I know where you are. I know how to access you. I can get to you anytime that I want." And so it really is a very terrifying thing for the person who is receiving those gifts or those messages or things like that. I think another form of contact, when we think about like cell phones, text messages, social media, email, all of that, it can be that same sort of thing where maybe somebody is sending you "I love you" messages, but if you are getting 100 text messages a day, even if that content says "I love you," that is a relentless harassing pattern of behavior, and it's exhausting. Every time your phone buzzes or your email chirps, a lot of people are filled with that instant like just tension of, "Oh my God, is this them? Like, I'm never going to have that moment of peace." And so it can be so incredibly exhausting and terrifying and all of these other negative emotions, and it can make it that much harder for some of those people, again, not in that situation, to understand. And so reaching out to friends and family member can feel really challenging, because you might have people saying things like, "Oh, this poor person, they love you so much," or "they miss you so much," or "they're just really brokenhearted," but that's not the same message that you're receiving. That's not the same feeling or about the situation that you have. And so that can make it really challenging sometimes. And also, create a situation where people really minimize that level of danger potentially that they're experiencing, because they have these outside people telling them things that aren't necessarily true.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So I think, with that, just really unpacking that complicated and, gray definition of stalking. I mean, it's clear to us, but it is kind of made gray by, the culture and the jokes that are made about stalking. But we know it to be a very serious and dangerous behavior that is an indicator that something could escalate. So I think with that, go ahead, Gina.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think too, it's really important to highlight that for people who have been in an intimate partner relationship that has resulted in stalking, or stalking is a part of that relationship.
Mhm.
Stalking is one of the most dangerous things that can happen. Anytime there is a homicide that occurs, stalking is nearly always a part of the situation prior to that incident taking place. And so I think it's something that's really important to recognize as a very serious and scary thing that happens, either within or after a relationship.
Mhm. Mhm. So with that, I think we could jump right into our first resource that we want to share. It is Spark, and it's a stalking awareness website, and we're going to share the link below and the website below. But Spark stands for Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, and it's to help identify and respond to the crime of stalking.
Are on the website, they have a lot of information based on the type of person searching. So myself as a victim service provider, I can go to the website and I can pull up specific resources to my work and serving clients and making sure that I'm giving them different referrals, resources, stalking logs, things like that for them to use. It also has information specific to somebody who's being a victim of stalking. And so if you are sitting there wondering, is this something that is a part of my situation and I want to learn more about it, you can go to this website and they're going to have some good information, some good definitions for you. And they're going to be able to connect you to some places that can provide that actual on the ground advocacy assistance. They also have information related to the criminal justice system, et cetera. And I think one of the great things that they have are these fact sheets and infographics. And so it's a really great way that they have put a lot of information together so that you can see the statistics around stalking, the definitions in a way that doesn't feel quite so overwhelming or so dense. And so they have nice little pie charts that explain, the different statistics. They have some little bubbles that have some text in them, et cetera. And so, think about that statistic. So one of them that it talks about is who the offenders are in relationship to the victim. So it talks about how 52.5% are current or former intimate partners. But it's important to know that you don't have to have been in a relationship with somebody to be a victim of stalking. And so 31.5% are acquaintances. So this might be a coworker or a casual friend or a friend of a friend. Maybe it's somebody that you went on 1 or 2 dates with, but you decided it just wasn't the right relationship, but this person is continuing to pursue you and to stalk you. Strangers, family members, people of authority, et cetera, can all be different individuals who commit stalking. And so then it also provides just some statistics around, when does partner stalking occur in terms of dating, during, or after the relationship. So the majority of stalking happens during and after the relationship. And that is something that we often encounter when we are providing services to clients. And so a lot of what we do is safety planning and looking at that whole situation to see, is somebody's phone or car or computer, are their devices being monitored? What options would they have? Is this person showing up at their place of work, showing up at their house? How can we bolster some of the security measures that they are already taking? And how can we maybe create some new ones? Is an order of protection something that's likely to be a good option in the situation, or is an order of protection going to escalate the violence, and is it maybe not a safe option? And so those are all the conversations that we have with clients that we're working with, whether or not they're in a relationship, it's after a relationship, or it's somebody that maybe they've never had a relationship with.
Right. And a lot of what we do when folks come in too is validation. Like a lot of people have these feelings that they are crazy. Maybe they've had interactions with the police where, that unfortunately, they haven't been able to communicate that behavior effectively, or maybe, they do unfortunately have a bad interaction with law enforcement, and it's those behaviors are not validated and they're maybe not believed. And so a lot of what we do is validating, like just kind of sorting out those feelings that you're going crazy, or that you're seeing things, or that maybe that this isn't happening and this is all in your head. But what we know it to be is a very gaslighting and stalking can go hand in hand. And so yeah, a lot of what we do too is just trying to really sort out all of that, the trauma that comes with stalking. So yeah, I mean, a lot of victims feel as if they have lost control and that they are crazy and that the problem was them, but we know that not to be true. And here to believe you.
Be able to provide some education on the fact that, yeah, a teddy bear showing up in your doorstep can be terrifying and not something that feels very safe, or a present that shows up inside your house and you're left wondering, how on earth did this get in here? Did a neighbor who has a spare key drop it by? Did they break into the apartment? Did they
Right.
send it with the kids to put in the house? Things like that. And so, again, all of these situations where other people might not necessarily be able to identify why that is so scary, but we see it from a very different perspective. We have a very different perspective on stalking and some of the impacts that can have on somebody's life, on their ability to go to work, their mental health, their friends and family relationships, their overall sense of safety, et cetera. And so we can really have conversations and provide some education and some information on the different ways that that plays out, and help people sort through, how does that fit with their life and their experience, and is this a part of what their experience is?
Right. And some of those ways in to ensure that doesn't feel crazy and like that they do feel validated is the importance of documentation when it comes to stalking. It might feel like a frivolous thing to like write down everything that you see, or that makes you feel uncomfortable, or that is a clear violation of your boundaries, but it's important when it comes to anything going, someone being charged with stalking. It's extremely hard in our system to get those charges through, and then to have to get courts involved. So we know that that's hard, and documentation helps not only for your mental health and like knowing what's going on at all times and keeping track of these very like stressful situations, but also that's to ensure that something does happen with your case and that the system does believe you. So I mean, that's where we can talk about the stalking log too.
I think that's a really important point. And for people that maybe aren't interested in reporting, so like maybe right now they're like, I'm never going to report this. The legal system is
Yeah.
not for me for whatever the variety of reasons that might be. But maybe a year from now, or 6 months from now, or something like that, you might feel differently, or something might have happened where it has escalated and now you feel that you have no choice to involve law enforcement or something like that. If you document the whole time, you have the ability not only to report to law enforcement, but some of those civil remedies like orders of protection, things like that, are going to be more possible.
Mhm.
But if something does change in the future, you have all of that already in place versus
Right.
starting from scratch in the future. And so if I go in to law enforcement and I say, hey, this has all been happening for a year and a half, but I don't have any documentation for that, then I have to now create that documentation. And it's probably going to take a lot of time before there can be some movement, versus going in and saying, like, hey, this has been going on for a year and a half. I haven't felt like reporting was the right option for me before now, but now I do. Here's
Mhm.
all this documentation. It could speed along that process. And
Right.
so, documentation is, if you feel that at any point there is ever a situation where you might be more open to either going the civil route and get an order of protection, or the criminal justice route and involve law enforcement into the situation, having that documentation is going to make that process significantly easier. And if ultimately in the future you never decide to pursue those routes, then you can, you have it, but you don't ever have to use it. And so it's one
Yeah.
of those where we really encourage people to keep record of those situations, whether or not they think that they want to involve the legal system, just in case they ever change their mind in the future. And for some people, they never involve it and they find other ways to move forward with their situations. And then for other clients we work with, having that documentation has been incredibly helpful for their situation.
Yeah.
And so a stalking log is really the best way to do that. And so we have those in the office. They are on, examples are on the Spark website. We can talk through with people on the phone what that looks like. And it's really documenting exactly what and when, and anybody who might be witness to that. And so what the situation is, what day, what time,
Mhm.
any pictures, perhaps somebody has shown up outside of your place of employment and you can take a picture of them sitting in their car.
Mhm.
Or if you, some people have security cameras, or they have like wildlife cameras that actually can double to provide some of that documentation. If you had a friend with you, a family member, and they're willing, and they saw what has happened, and they would be able to attest to that. If you called law enforcement, getting the report number, things like that are all very helpful when trying to document stalking situations.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Gina, was that stalking log on the Victim Connect version of it, or is it on the Spark website?
It is on the Spark website for sure. It might also be on the Victim Connect. I would have to take a look, but they have it under the resources tab, and then under the victims tab, there is at the very bottom is resources for victim, and it is stalking incident and behavior log. You can
Mm-hmm.
also Google stalking logs and find them everywhere. It is not an official form. Some people even just do it in a notebook or on their computer or on their cell phone, where they just kind of do date, time, description, location, witnesses, law enforcement involvement, etc. And so it can be as formal or as informal as people want. We also like to encourage people, if you are getting emails or text messages or phone calls, to never delete them. And sometimes that can be hard because nobody wants to log into their email and see all of this stuff that's been happening. And so maybe you create a specific folder that you can move stuff into, or you can sometimes set up rules so that certain people or subjects, et cetera, just kind of auto filter into a folder. Sometimes we have helped people get a secondary cell phone or things like that, so that they can keep the one line active. They can have all the messages go there, but that's not actually the phone that they use on the day-to-day for work, for friends,
Yeah.
for family, et cetera. And so all of those depend on people's resources, their financial situations, et cetera. And that's certainly something that we can help problem solve with people around what are going to be the best options for you for how to document, but also be able to live your life as fully and as free from that stress and fear as possible.
Yeah. I think that's good information for people to have, that there's not just one way to document these things. It can be a different form for everybody, whatever's like best for your life. And so I do think that, you know, it's important for us to address like the way that we're in right now with COVID and the pandemic. And it's important for us to point out how some of those stalking behaviors can be made more easy because of COVID. And, you know, some of those reasons can be because it's much easier right now to target technology and to present as a scam. It's much easier to monitor people's movements because people aren't going that many places right now, or they haven't been over the past couple weeks. There are limited places open, right? There's not as many businesses open right now. We live in a very small community here in Helena, so you know, that in itself can be made even more easier to track a person. And then, you know, with the risk of COVID, people are trying to keep their, you know, away from their family members or their friends that are high risk. So, you know, people's houses to escape to overnight or for a while until you feel safe, you know, that might not be an option for folks right now. And in that sense, you know, with people, with the economy being the way it is right now, people are doubling up. People are having to move back in with their parents or their sister, or, you know, they already have people staying on their couch and there may not be room for you, unfortunately. So we know that those are all extra hurdles right now that people are experiencing when unfortunately they're experiencing stalking.
There's a lot of resources out there for people to access help. Obviously, we at the Friendship Center have our 24-hour crisis line, and we are still here. We are accessible anytime or day or night to help people work through those situations or those issues. The Victim Connect Resource Center that we briefly mentioned earlier is another really great resource, and they have a talk where you can call or you can chat. And so if that feels like a safer option, where maybe you can chat on your cell phone or on your computer, but you can't talk on a cell phone, they have a really great that's a really great resource to be able to do that as well. And they also have just some information. The Victims Connect Resource Center is not specific to stalking, so it's more specific to crime victims generally speaking. That being said, they still have information, they have resources specific to stalking and can provide that help and support as well.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and then we just wanted to briefly share a couple more resources. There are a lot out there, but we just felt that these were pretty important for folks. But there's a very interesting YouTube video called Stalking for Love, and it really depicts and unpacks the way culture represents love, but in actuality is a very a violation of boundaries and is stalking behavior. So, I mean, it's some of your favorite classics that we're about to ruin, but, you know, Say Anything, you know, where someone's waiting out your window, or tracking your movements. That's a very famous movie, and so that one is, I mean, in all of these blockbuster films or in all of these classics, the woman is just being pursued and pursued and pursued. And somehow in the end, after a million phone calls, or after showing up at your work with flowers, or breaking into your home and installing these cameras to know what you like and what you don't like, it's all perceived in the movie as being romantic. But in actuality, it is creepy and a violation of your boundaries. So, unfortunately, it's out there in songs, in, sitcoms, in very, very popular movies. So it's a very entertaining video, and kind of a lighter, eye-opening window into some really unhealthy behavior.
And I think it's really important to be able to look at how our pop culture and our media portray a lot of these issues, because they minimize the severity of the situation. In the movies, maybe it is something that, one of the points that it makes is we, as the viewer of the movie, we have insight into both people. So we have insight into the fact that maybe the other person is, doesn't want to engage in that relationship, for instance, but the person engaging in the stalking behavior doesn't have access to that same information. And so if you take out our knowledge of the fact that this person does want to engage in that relationship, it really turns the behavior into something a lot more sinister. And I think overall, it really sends these messages that stalking's not serious, that it's not serious to relentlessly force your way into somebody's life because you constantly show up at their work or their home, or you just ask them out until finally they give in to say yes, or in some cases directly threaten them, right? Like, I'm not going to donate this whatever to your business unless you go on a date with me first, or I'm not going to leave your place of business. I'm going to keep causing this scene until you go on a date with me, or things like that. And so I feel like often in a lot of these movies, the first date or true romantic thing that happens in the movie is actually the direct result of a threat or some very specific overt coercion. And the way that it's presented is that this is a normal, healthy, appropriate way to start a relationship. But if you take those same situations and really apply them to the real world, that would feel very scary or very frightening for a lot of people. And what we know about stalkers is that it's similar to all of the other issues where we come back to power and control. And that's what it is I want control over you. I want control over who you talk to and where you go. And I want to be able to know that information, maybe where you dress or how you dress. And I'm going to do whatever I need to make that happen. And it's not about love or flattery or anything else. Jealousy is a very scary thing in real life. It's a very high risk factor for future violence and homicides and things like that. And so when we see stalking be portrayed in such a light, joking type manner, it really sends the message that for somebody who is in a very scary stalking situation, that it's not that big of a deal, that you should be flattered by this situation, etc. And so it can really create a confusing message for the individual, but also for the friends and family on the outside, and then make it a lot harder for the legal system to take action, because even if technically under the strict letter of the law, this is a crime that's occurring, they have to be able to prove it to a jury who is going to convict. And if you have jury members who all think stalking is not a big deal, or that these things really aren't that scary, they're not as likely to convict. And so, law enforcement and prosecutors really have to think about all of that information for how they proceed. And so that's where you need that higher level of documentation and evidence for a crime such as stalking versus you do for something that appears a lot more straightforward, like an aggravated assault, right? Somebody walks up and punches you and you have a bruise. That's a lot more of a clear-cut case than what you're going to find for stalking situations. And so when you think about the ability to prove that in the legal system, one of the things too that I think is helpful to know, there's another series of videos and website that we want to talk about. And so it is outrageus.org. And it looks like outrageous, but it's spelt just a little bit different. So outrageus.org. And that is a website dedicated to stalking, and it has some good information about dating violence as well. And so that is where a lot of the videos are actually interviews with former stalking victims, with law enforcement, with county attorneys' offices, really talking about some of the struggles and the dynamics involved with stalking, and how challenging sometimes it can be to move forward with those cases. One of the things that's helpful and I think scary to know is that most stalking situations actually last for 1 to 2 years, and that 11% of stalking situations last for 5 years or more. And so, if you
Wow.
can possibly imagine how hard that would be to have that situation taking place for 5 plus years, and how what an impact that might have on your life. And so outrageus.org is a really great website also for information and for some of those videos. I also think it's important to mention that some of the videos do discuss very specific stalking scenarios and violence that take place. So just exercising caution with where you are, and your own self-care, your own support systems, your own mental health, etc., so that you are really in a space where that information is not going to feel very unsafe or triggering or traumatic to see some of that. So
Yeah.
it's not graphic in terms of the um, visual piece of it, but in terms of the stories that are discussed, it can be a little intense for some of those videos.
Yeah. And just like Gina mentioned earlier, the Friendship Center is here still to serve folks remotely. If you are experiencing stalking behavior, or maybe it's been a long time coming for you, and now you're wanting to take action, the Friendship Center can help you safety plan what is best for your life and what will be is safest for you. And so we are here 24/7. We have a crisis line, and we are here to serve you.
Yeah, and I think that too, if you have been in a situation where you've been coping pretty okay and COVID is really throwing your routines and your safety behaviors for a loop because of all of the different impacts that COVID has had on our lives, we're happy to have those creative brainstorming conversations with you as well. One of the most common services probably we provide is safety planning, because that's relevant for every area of our service, and that includes mental and emotional safety as well. And so even if you feel physically safe but you're really struggling with that emotional safety piece, give us a call. We can talk through resources, provide referrals to therapists or
Yeah,
other support systems in our community that can maybe help you process so that you are able to stay safe both physically and emotionally.
great. All right. Well, we really appreciate everyone who tuned in today to watch this, and we really hope you found this video helpful. And we hope you have a good rest of your week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.